The waterfall shouldn't have been there. Not on any map, not in these hills. But after 3 weeks following the river north, Eli, Tom, and Jacob found it, waters glowing from within, a doorway carved with unknown symbols hidden behind the spray. That night the mist carried whispers that knew their names. By morning, their footprints had vanished, the compass spinning wildly toward the falls. "We didn't come this far to be afraid of what's waiting," Eli said, eyes fixed on the trembling water. When they stepped through, they disappeared completely. What awaits beyond a doorway that shouldn't exist? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Larkspur Crossing hadn't seen proper rain in 18 months. The town sat baking under a merciless sun, its wooden buildings bleached and warping, the once fertile fields surrounding it now more dust than soil. Most folks had already left, those with somewhere to go, or the courage to leave without knowing where they'd land. Eli stood on the porch of his uncle's ranch house, studying his hands in the harsh morning light. Thick calluses, cracked skin, scars from barbed wire and broken tools. 24 years old, and his hands looked like they belonged to a man twice his age. Still thinking about leaving? His uncle appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. The older man's face was a road map of wrinkles, each one carved by disappointment. Not much reason to stay. Eli flexed his fingers, feeling the familiar ache in his joints. River won't lead you nowhere special. Just more country that don't want you, maybe. Eli nodded respectfully. Or maybe something else. Later, at the general store, Tom was arguing with the owner about credit. His father's brass compass lay open on the counter between them. "Your daddy owed money all over town when he went north," the storekeeper said. "That compass ain't worth what he already owed, let alone more supplies." Tom snatched back the compass. The glass was cracked, the needle wobbled uncertainly, but he handled it like it was made of gold. "My father found something up there, something worth finding." Tom's voice had the dreamy quality it always took on when he spoke of his father, a man 5 years gone. What he found was trouble, most likely. The storekeeper turned away. "Or nothing at all." Jacob watched from the doorway, a half smile on his face. Unlike the others, he had no history in Larkspur. He'd blown in last fall, picked up work where he could find it, and kept to himself. "Your daddy was a fool," Jacob said as they walked out empty-handed. "But that don't mean he was wrong." That evening, they met at the edge of town, where the small river curved around a stand of struggling cottonwoods. The water was low but still flowing, fed by some distant source in the northern mountains. "Sheriff came by today," said Eli, setting down his pack. "Asking what we were planning?" Tom laughed bitterly. "What's he care? And less mouth to feed in this dying place. He said there's nothing up north but wilderness and old stories." Eli took out a small knife and tested its edge with his thumb. "Said men go up that way and don't come back." Jacob squatted by the river, trailing his fingers in the water. "Men like your daddy, Tom." Tom didn't answer, just opened the compass and watched the needle swing lazily before settling in a direction that wasn't quite north. "2 rifles enough?" Eli asked, changing the subject. "Plenty," said Jacob. "Between that and the fishing line, we'll eat. Not like we got money for more anyway." They fell silent, watching the sun sink behind the dusty hills. What lay ahead was unknown, but what lay behind was a slow death. Jobs that broke your body for wages that couldn't feed you. Fields that wouldn't grow. A town folding in on itself. When my father left, he told my mother he was following the river to the source. Tom said finally. Said everything we needed was up there. Water, gold, land. A new start. "And you believe that?" Jacob asked, not unkindly. Tom closed the compass with a snap. "I believe he found something. Something that made him never want to come back here. At dawn, they left with what little they could carry. 2 rifles, fishing line, a worn tent, the clothes on their backs and not much else." A handful of townsfolk watched them go, expressions torn between envy and pity. The sheriff stood at the edge of town, thumbs hooked in his belt. "You boys find anything worth finding, you come back and tell us," he called. "This town could use some good news. Eli didn't look back. His scarred hands gripped his pack straps tight as they reached the river's edge and made their choice. North, always north. Following the water to whatever waited upstream, the first days on the river felt like freedom. Their shadows stretched long across the water as they walked northward, following the gentle current. The landscape was familiar at first: scrubby hills, scattered trees bent by the constant wind, an occasional abandoned homestead. "Ever wonder who lived there?" Tom asked, nodding toward a collapsing cabin as they passed. "What made them give up and leave?" "Same thing that's happening to Larkspur," Eli replied. "Land gets hard, people get tired." Jacob walked slightly ahead, his eyes always scanning the horizon. "My father used to say a man only needs 3 things to be happy: something to do, something to hope for, and something to love." He glanced back at them with a half-smile. "Right now, I got 2 out of 3. At dusk, they made camp on a flat stretch near the river. Jacob pulled a small stone pipe from his pocket, carved from smooth river rock. He packed it with the last of his tobacco and lit it with an ember from their fire. "Found the stone 2 towns back," he explained, passing the pipe to Eli. "River stones make good pipes. They remember the water." They passed the pipe between them as the stars emerged. The tobacco was harsh but calming. It became a nightly ritual: fire, pipe, stories shared in the growing dark. "My father believed there was gold up north," Tom said on the 3rd night, watching the compass needle waver in the firelight. "Not just any gold. A whole deposit nobody had found yet. That why your compass points all funny sometimes?" Jacob asked. "Leading you to Daddy's gold?" Tom closed the compass with a snap. "It's broken." "Has been since they brought back his things." "What did bring back?" Eli asked quietly. "Just the compass and his wedding ring." "Said that's all they found." Nobody asked who they were or why they'd been looking for Tom's father in the first place. On the 5th day, they caught a big trout in a deep pool. The meal felt like a feast after days of jerky and hardtack. As they ate, Eli revealed his own reason for coming. "There's supposed to be unclaimed land past the northern ridge. Good land with year-round water. You want to be a farmer?" Jacob seemed surprised. "I want something that's mine," Eli said simply. "Something no one can take away when times get hard." Jacob just nodded, passing the stone pipe again. When the other 2 looked at him expectantly, waiting for his own story, he simply smiled and said, "I'm just along for the company." The weather turned on the 6th day. Rain fell in sheets, forcing them to shelter beneath a rocky overhang. Their provisions got soaked despite their efforts. "At least the river won't run dry," Tom said, trying to find optimism as they spread their belongings to dry. That night, huddled close for warmth, they spoke less. The comfort of the early days was fading as the reality of their journey settled in. They were committed now, too far from Larkspur to easily turn back. On the 8th day, they encountered another soul, an old trapper living in a snug cabin beside a tributary. He offered them coffee and a place to dry their boots by his fire. "Where you boys headed?" he asked, his beard nearly hiding his mouth. "Following the river north," Eli answered. The old man's eyes narrowed. "How far north?" "As far as it goes," said Tom. The trapper fell silent, stirring his coffee slowly. Finally, he said, "River changes up ahead." "The land, too, gets strange." "Strange how?" Jacob asked. "Just strange. Like it ain't quite settled on what it wants to be." The trapper wouldn't elaborate further, but as they prepared to leave, he added, "If the compass spins, turn back. Nothing good lies beyond that point." They thanked him for the coffee and continued on. That night, Tom checked his compass and found the needle spinning slowly, unable to find north. He closed it quickly and told no one. The next morning, they crested a hill and saw the landscape changing ahead. Rock formations jutting from the earth like broken teeth, the river narrowing and running faster. The familiar world was falling behind, and something else waited ahead. Jacob took out his stone pipe, but found he was out of tobacco. Still, they passed it between them that night, empty but somehow still comforting. A ritual to hold on to as the world around them began to shift into something unfamiliar. The landscape shifted gradually, then all at once. Gone were the dusty hills of home, replaced by towering rock formations that rose like sentinels from the earth. The river cut deeper here, carving a path through stone that seemed too deliberate to be natural. "Look at how they're arranged," Tom said, pointing to a series of tall rocks standing in a perfect arc. "Almost like someone placed them that way." Eli shrugged. Wind and water do strange things over time, but even he couldn't explain the sounds. When the breeze picked up, it moved through channels in the rock, creating eerie whispers that almost formed words. They made camp beneath one such formation, and the sounds kept them awake. "Anyone else hear that?" Jacob asked, sitting up suddenly in the darkness. "It sounds like someone saying return." "It's just the wind," Eli insisted. Though he'd heard it too, Tom had his compass out again, watching the needle swing wildly before settling, then spinning again moments later. He snapped it shut when he noticed Jacob watching. "We're being followed," Eli announced the next morning. Studying tracks around their camp, they grabbed their rifles, scanning the ridgeline, only to see a massive elk watching them from above. It regarded them calmly before disappearing over the ridge. "Just curious about the visitors," Jacob said, but he seemed uneasy. "Something doesn't feel right about this place. The air's too heavy." He wasn't wrong. As they progressed, the atmosphere grew dense, pressing against their skin like an approaching storm that never broke. The vegetation changed too, unfamiliar plants with leaves that seemed to turn away from human touch. Trees with bark patterns that looked disturbingly like faces. On the third day in this new terrain, they entered a section of forest where all sound suddenly dampened. No birds called. Their footsteps made no noise on the forest floor. Even the river ran silent, though they could see the water moving. "We should go back," Jacob said, his voice barely audible despite his effort to speak loudly. "We've come too far," Eli replied. His voice too was swallowed by the unnatural quiet. Tom pulled out his compass again. The needle spun continuously now, as if frantically searching for something it couldn't find. For the first time, he showed the others. "My father's compass never did this before he went north," he said. "Now it happens more the further we go. The old trapper warned us," Jacob reminded them. "If the compass spins, turn back." Eli studied the strange rock formations visible through the trees. From this angle, they almost looked like giant letters in a language he couldn't read. "One more day," he said finally. "We'll go one more day north. If things get stranger, we'll reconsider." That night, they made camp at the edge of the silent forest. Jacob insisted they build a larger fire than usual, as if the light could keep away whatever made the place so unnatural. "My grandmother used to tell stories," he said, feeding another branch to the flames, "about places where the world wears thin, where things can slip through from elsewhere." "You think that's what this is?" Tom asked. Jacob shrugged. "I never believed those stories. Until now." As they settled into uneasy sleep, a fog began to roll in from the river. It moved unnaturally, seeming to advance and retreat like breathing. Soon their camp was engulfed in mist so thick they could barely see the fire. The fog muffled all sound, creating a pocket of absolute silence around each man. Eli woke in the night to find the fog had thickened further. He could no longer see his companions, though they had fallen asleep barely an arm's length away. When he called out, his voice went nowhere, as if the fog swallowed the sound at his lips. For a moment, he thought he saw shapes moving in the mist, tall, slender figures that seemed to be watching. He reached for his rifle, but his hand passed through empty air where it should have been. The fog briefly thinned. His rifle lay exactly where he'd left it. The shapes were gone. His companions slept undisturbed. When morning came, the fog retreated to the river. They found strange markings around their camp, not footprints, but perfect circles pressed into the earth, each about the size of a dinner plate, arranged in patterns none of them recognized. "One more day," Eli repeated, though with less conviction. Tom nodded, clutching the spinning compass. Jacob said nothing, but shouldered his pack and followed as they continued north. Deeper into the changing lands, they descended into the valley shortly after midday. The fog was waiting for them. It wasn't like the mist from the night before. This was different, older somehow. It hung suspended in the valley, neither advancing nor retreating, a perfect white sea with no visible bottom. The river disappeared into it, and the land beyond was hidden completely. "We'll lose our way in that," Jacob said, eyeing the fog with suspicion. "We follow the river," Eli replied. "We can't get lost if we stay close to it." Tom was studying his father's journal, flipping through weathered pages with increasing excitement. "My father wrote about this," he said. "He called it the Valley of Forgetting." "Cheerful name," Jacob muttered. "No, not because it makes you forget," Tom explained. "Because it's been forgotten. It shouldn't exist on any map, but here it is." They stood at the edge of the fog for a long moment, each man wrestling with his own doubts. Finally, Eli stepped forward into the white, and the others followed. The fog swallowed them completely. Visibility extended barely an arm's length in any direction. Sounds became distorted. Close things seemed distant, far things sounded near. The rushing of the river echoed strangely, sometimes seeming to come from all directions at once. "Stay close," Eli called. Though he could barely see the others, they moved slowly, keeping the river to their right. Time became difficult to judge. The light diffused through the fog remained constant, giving no hint whether minutes or hours were passing. "Does anyone else taste that?" Tom asked suddenly. The fog did have a taste, different for each of them. For Tom, it tasted of his mother's bread, hot from the oven. For Jacob, the salt tang of the ocean he'd once seen as a boy. For Eli, the sweetness of the first spring berries. "It's in our heads," Eli said. But his voice lacked conviction. The deeper they went, the stronger the sensations became. The fog didn't just taste of memories, it summoned them whole. Each man found himself momentarily reliving a significant moment from his past. The experiences so vivid they stopped walking. Lost in remembrance, Eli saw himself as a boy, watching his father ride away for the last time. Tom felt the weight of his father's compass being pressed into his hand. Jacob recalled a fire, people screaming, and himself running into the night. "It's like it's tasting us back," Tom whispered when the vision released him. They pressed on, but the fog was disorienting. Distances became impossible to judge. Voices sounded strange. At one point they became separated briefly, each experiencing a different path through the mist. When Eli called out, he heard Tom's reply coming from what seemed like 3 different directions. Jacob's voice echoed as if in a vast cavern, though they were in open air. "Something moved past me," Jacob hissed suddenly, grabbing Eli's arm. "Something big." They froze, straining to hear or see through the white veil. For a moment, Eli thought he glimpsed a tall, slender shape gliding through the fog, the same silhouette he'd seen the night before. Then it was gone. "We need to keep moving," he insisted. Hours later, or perhaps it was minutes, none of them could tell, they stumbled upon the remains of a campsite. A fire pit cold for what seemed like years. Beside it, a rusted tin cup, a weathered boot, and an old knife with a bone handle. "Someone else made it this far," Tom said, picking up the knife. The blade was still sharp despite its age, and they left in a hurry, Jacob added. "Nobody leaves a good knife behind willingly." As evening approached, or so they guessed from their growing fatigue, they made their own camp. The fog prevented them from gathering firewood, so they huddled together in darkness, the mist pressing close around them. In the night, the fog thickened further, if that was possible. It seemed to develop currents, flowing around them like water. And with these currents came whispers, too faint to understand, but clearly voices. "Just the wind," Eli said. "Though there was no wind, or just our minds playing tricks," Jacob added. Not believing it himself, Tom said nothing. He was too busy listening to what sounded like his father's voice, calling from somewhere deeper in the valley. By morning, and they only knew it was morning because the fog lightened slightly, they found the river had widened. Through breaks in the mist, they could see the far bank was now much farther away. The water itself had changed too, clearer, faster, with an unusual blue tint they'd never seen in any river before. "We must be near the end of the valley," Eli said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. They gathered their things and continued north. each man secretly wondering what waited beyond the fog, and whether they truly wanted to find it. They emerged from the fog near dusk, clothes damp and spirits weary. The valley fell behind them like a dream half remembered. Ahead, the river had transformed completely. No longer the modest waterway they'd followed from Larkspur, it now surged with unusual power. The water ran clear as glass, revealing depths that seemed impossible. And within those depths, something glowed. "Look," Tom whispered, pointing to the riverbed, where stones pulsed with a faint blue light. "I've never seen anything like it." Eli crouched at the river's edge, reaching cautiously into the current. He pulled out a smooth, round stone. In his palm, it glowed for several seconds before gradually fading to ordinary grey. "It only shines when wet," Jacob observed, taking the stone and dipping it back in the water. The blue glow returned immediately. They filled their pockets with the strange stones, using them as lanterns as daylight faded. That night, Tom attempted to navigate by the stars, as his father had taught him. He stared upward for a long time, confusion growing on his face. "Something wrong?" Eli asked. "The stars," Tom said quietly. "They're not right." Jacob and Eli looked up. At first glance, the night sky appeared normal, but as they studied it, subtle wrongness became apparent. Familiar constellations were present but altered, stars missing or added, patterns shifted just enough to be unsettling. "Maybe we're just turned around," Eli suggested without conviction. Tom shook his head. "I know the summer sky like I know my own hands." "That's not it," he pointed. "See there? That's almost the North Star, but it's too bright and slightly off position." They all fell silent, considering the implications. "We could be further north than we thought," Jacob offered weakly. "Stars don't change because you walk north for 2 weeks," Tom replied. That night, they all had the same dream. The river spoke to them, not with words, but with images and sensations. It showed them a path, a destination, something waiting at the end of their journey. Each man saw it differently, colored by his own hopes and fears, but all felt the river's pull growing stronger. Morning brought little comfort. Tom tried to catch fish for breakfast, but what he pulled from the river were like no fish they'd ever seen. Iridescent scales, too many fins, eyes that seemed too aware. They decided not to eat them. "We should go back," Jacob said as they broke camp. "Nothing about this feels right anymore." Eli stood silently for a long moment, looking northward where the river disappeared around a bend. "And go back to what?" "Larkspur is dying." "At least this way we might find something, or something might find us," Jacob muttered. The argument that followed was their most heated yet. Jacob insisted they'd gone far enough, that the strangeness around them would only grow worse. Eli maintained they had no choice but to continue. Tom stood apart, watching his compass needle spin and listening to something only he could hear. "I'm going back," Jacob finally declared, shouldering his pack. "Then go," Eli snapped. Though his eyes betrayed concern, Jacob took 3 steps south, then stopped. He stood frozen, staring at something behind Eli and Tom. They turned to see what had halted him. The river had changed course. Where it had flowed from the north just moments before, it now curved in from the east, cutting off the path back the way they'd come. "That's not possible," Jacob whispered. They spent the morning scouting, trying to get their bearings, but nothing made sense. Landmarks they'd passed the day before were gone or altered. The very landscape seemed to shift when they weren't looking directly at it. That afternoon, Tom nearly drowned. He slipped on wet stones while refilling their canteens, falling into the unnaturally clear river. Instead of floating, he sank immediately, as if something pulled him down. When Eli and Jacob dragged him out, Tom was pale and shaking. "Something was down there," he gasped when he could speak again. "Something grabbed me." They examined his ankle and found marks like fingers where something had gripped him. That evening, as an unnatural dusk fell beneath the wrong stars, they spotted something through the trees ahead, a distant white spray rising above the forest. "Waterfall," Eli said simply. They made camp with the sound of falling water reaching them faintly. None of them spoke of turning back again. The river had made that decision for them, reshaping itself to guide them forward. toward whatever waited at the falls. As they settled into uneasy sleep, the glow of the river stones seemed to pulse in rhythm, like a heartbeat calling them onward. The sound of the waterfall grew louder as they traveled, a constant roar that seemed to pull them forward. The river widened further, its banks lined with more of the luminescent stones, glowing brighter here than they had before. Jacob found a sturdy branch that morning, fashioning it into a walking stick. Using his knife, he carved notches along its length, one for each day since they'd left Larkspur, as best he could reckon. 17 days, he said, studying his work. Feels like months. That evening, he added detailed markings between the notches, loops and whirls that he claimed represented their journey. When Eli asked about them, Jacob shrugged. Just passing time, he said, though his fingers traced the patterns with unusual care. The forest changed as they drew closer to the falls. The trees grew taller, their bark smoother and paler than any they'd seen before. Most striking was their arrangement, no longer random, but in perfect concentric circles, as if planted by some meticulous hand. "This isn't natural," Tom whispered as they passed through the first ring of trees. "Nothing has been natural for days," Eli replied. In the center of each circle of trees lay a small pool of water, still and clear as glass. Tom knelt beside one, intending to refill his canteen, but Jacob grabbed his wrist. "Don't," he warned. "Something's not right about these pools." As if responding to his voice, the water in the pool stirred, though there was no wind. It settled into a perfect mirror surface again, but now it reflected not the sky above, but a different scene entirely, a town square, people moving about their business, none of them familiar. "What in hell?" Eli breathed. They backed away from the pool, but everywhere they turned, they found themselves passing through more circles of trees, each with its own pool, showing different visions, some recognizable as places they knew, others completely alien. Jacob's walking stick began to change. The markings he'd carved deepened overnight, as if etched by an invisible hand. New patterns appeared alongside his original notches, symbols matching those they'd seen reflected in the strange pools. "I didn't carve these," he insisted, showing the others in the morning light. They moved forward warily now, the thunderous sound of the falls growing ever louder. Through gaps in the trees, they occasionally glimpsed something large and white, the spray of falling water, massive beyond anything they'd imagined. By midday, they could feel a fine mist on their skin, though the waterfall remained hidden behind the final stands of trees. The concentric circles grew more tightly packed here, trees standing barely an arm's length apart, their trunks bone white and smooth as polished stone. "Look there," Tom said suddenly, pointing ahead. Through the trees, they could see the remnants of stone foundations, geometric shapes half buried in the earth, covered with moss but clearly man-made. "Someone lived here," Eli said, kneeling to examine the weathered stone. "A long time ago." They found more structures as they continued, the remains of walls, a stone circle that might have been a well, foundations suggesting houses or other buildings arranged in a pattern that mirrored the concentric tree circles surrounding them. "Not just someone," Tom said, "a whole settlement." As the sun began to set, they finally broke through the last ring of trees and stood at the edge of a wide clearing. There at last was the waterfall, an enormous curtain of water falling from a cliff so high its top was lost in mist. The water glowed with the same blue luminescence as the river stones, but stronger, filling the clearing with ghostly light. The roar was deafening. They could feel it in their chests, a constant vibration that seemed to echo the beating of their hearts. "It's beautiful," Tom said, his voice barely audible above the tumult. Even Jacob seemed momentarily entranced, his usual wariness forgotten as he stared at the massive falls. Eli walked forward slowly, drawn to the base of the cliff where the falling water created a permanent rainbow in the mist. As he approached, he noticed shadows behind the water, darker areas that didn't match the smooth cliff face. Squinting through the spray, he could make out shapes, geometric patterns, straight lines, right angles. Not natural formations, but structures hidden behind the curtain of water. There's something back there, he called to the others. Pointing, they moved closer together, standing at the edge of the pool formed by the falls, watching as the last daylight faded and the water's blue glow intensified in the gathering darkness. Jacob looked down at his walking stick and froze. The symbols carved into the wood were glowing now too, matching the pulsing light of the waterfall. "We shouldn't stay here," he said, but he made no move to leave. None of them did. Something about this place held them, a feeling of arrival, of destination. After all the strangeness of their journey, they had found what they'd been seeking, even if they hadn't known what that was when they left Larkspur. They made camp at the edge of the clearing, unable to tear themselves away from the view of the glowing falls. The concentric forest standing silent behind them like patient sentinels, they made camp within sight of the falls, the constant roar creating a wall of sound that isolated them. Speaking required leaning close, nearly shouting, which gave their words a strange intimacy, as if each sentence was a secret shared. "We should explore behind the waterfall tomorrow," Eli said as they built a small fire. The flames seemed dimmer than usual, competing with the waterfall's blue glow. Jacob looked skeptical. What if there's nothing there? Or worse, what if there is? "That's why we came," Tom reminded him. "To find something." The temperature dropped as darkness settled. They huddled closer to the fire, its warmth somehow less penetrating than it should have been. The waterfall's glow intensified with the night, casting everything in ghostly blue. "Why did you really leave Larkspur?" Eli asked suddenly, looking at Jacob. The question hung between them. They'd been traveling together for weeks, yet Jacob remained a mystery. Jacob stared into the fire. "Running from something," he finally admitted. "Dead bad decisions. People looking for me. Dangerous people." Tom asked, "Doesn't matter now." Jacob gestured to the glowing falls, the concentric forest, the stone foundations. "I don't think they could follow us here. I'm not sure we're even in the same world anymore." The truth of this statement settled over them. None argued. Too much had changed. The river, the stars, the very laws of nature seemed different here. "Your turn," Jacob said to Eli. "You said you wanted land of your own, but that's not all, is it?" Eli rubbed his scarred hands together slowly. "My father left when I was 10. Just like yours, Tom. Said he was following the river north, looking for something better." He paused. "Never came back. You think he found this place?" Tom asked. "I don't know what he found, but I always knew I'd follow someday." They fell silent, the waterfall's roar filling the space between words. Then Tom opened his father's journal, tracing the familiar handwriting with his finger. "My father's last entry mentions a door," he said. "A passage to somewhere else. He wrote that he was afraid to go through, but more afraid not to." "And he went through?" Jacob asked. Tom closed the journal. "The next pages are blank. He either went through and never wrote again, or he went through and couldn't come back to finish the journal," Eli completed. The mist from the falls grew thicker as the night progressed. It rolled through their camp in waves, cool against their skin, carrying whispers just below the threshold of understanding. Each man took a turn at watch, though none were sure what they were watching for. During his shift, Jacob swore he saw tall figures moving at the forest's edge, but they vanished when he blinked. Tom, during the pre-dawn hours, heard his name called clearly from behind the waterfall. He almost went to investigate before remembering his promise not to leave camp alone. Eli, in the grey light of early morning, noticed something odd about the ground around them. "Look," he called to the others as they woke. "Our footprints from yesterday, they're gone. Where their boots had left clear impressions in the soft earth, there were now only strange markings, perfect circles overlapping in complex patterns, pressed deep into the soil as if by tremendous weight. Could be animals," Jacob suggested without conviction. "What kind of animal makes marks like these?" Tom countered. As they ate a cold breakfast, none wanting to draw attention with a fire in daylight, they noticed something else unusual. The waterfall seemed closer than it had been the night before. "Are we remembering wrong?" Jacob asked as they all stood staring. "No," said Eli. "It's moved." "Well, we have." They packed quickly, a new urgency in their movements. The rules of this place, if there were rules at all, were beyond their understanding. The only certainty was uncertainty. As they approached the falls, the spray soaked their clothes. The roar became all-encompassing, vibrating through their bodies. Through the curtain of water, the shadowy structures Eli had glimpsed were more visible now. Straight lines and right angles. Unmistakably constructed, Eli reached out, his hand disappearing into the falling water. He expected cold, but the water was surprisingly warm, almost body temperature. When he pulled his hand back, droplets on his skin glowed blue for several seconds before fading. At the base of the falls, partially hidden by mist and spray, they found what they'd been drawn to all along, a doorway carved into the rock face. Half concealed behind the curtain of water, ancient symbols covered its surface, eerily similar to the markings that had appeared around their camp and on Jacob's walking stick. Jacob pressed his ear against the stone door. His eyes widened. "I can hear something," he shouted over the roar of the falls. "Like a heartbeat." Tom's compass, when he checked it, was finally still. The needle pointed steadily at the door, unwavering for the first time since they'd left Larkspur. They stood there, 3 men at the edge of a mystery, soaked by spray from a waterfall that shouldn't exist, facing a doorway that led to somewhere unknown. "Now what?" Jacob asked, voicing the question in all their minds. Morning light filtered through the mist, creating rainbows unlike any they'd seen before. Among the familiar bands of color were others, hues that had no names, colors that shouldn't exist. The men found themselves unable to look away, their eyes struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. "That's not right," Jacob muttered, blinking rapidly. "Colors don't. They shouldn't." Words failed him. How could one describe a color that had never been seen before? The waterfall's roar filled their ears as they approached again. Up close, the falling water seemed almost alive, pulsing, shifting, the blue glow within it brightening and dimming in a rhythm reminiscent of breathing. Eli moved closer to the cliff face, slipping carefully over wet rocks. The others followed. The spray soaked them immediately, clothes clinging to skin, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The water was warm, almost welcome. "There," Eli pointed through the curtain of water. "You see it?" The structures they'd glimpsed yesterday were clearer now. Behind the waterfall, built into, or perhaps grown from the cliff itself, stood what could only be described as architecture. Walls, columns, archways, all made of the same smooth, pale stone. Water flowed over and around these structures without seeming to erode them. "How old do you think it is?" Tom asked, voice raised against the roar. "Older than Larkspur," Jacob answered. "Older than anything I've ever seen." They edged closer, the water now up to their knees. Through a particularly heavy section of the falls, they could make out a doorway, just as Tom had described from his father's journal. It stood about 7 feet tall, its edges unnaturally straight, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Becoming clearer in peripheral vision, Eli reached out, his hand disappearing into the falling water. When his fingers touched the stone beyond, he jerked back in surprise. "It's warm," he said, "and I felt something like it was carved." He tried again, more deliberately this time. His fingers traced the surface of the stone, feeling raised patterns beneath his touch. Symbols, letters perhaps, in a language none of them knew. "Let me see," Tom said, pressing forward. He ran his hands over the same area, eyes closed in concentration. "These markings, they're similar to drawings in my father's journal. The ones from his last few entries." Jacob, still hanging back, watched the doorway with undisguised suspicion. "Can you read them?" "No," Tom admitted, "but they feel familiar somehow." As they examined the doorway more closely, they discovered it wasn't merely carved into the rock. It was a true entrance, with a seam outlining what appeared to be a door. There was no handle, no obvious mechanism for opening it, just the carved symbols covering its surface. Jacob finally approached, pressing his ear against the stone. His eyes widened. "I can hear something," he said, then gestured for the others to listen. They took turns. Through the stone came a steady, rhythmic sound, unmistakably similar to a heartbeat, but slower, deeper, as if belonging to something massive. "It's coming from inside the mountain," Eli said. Stepping back to look at the cliff face stretching high above them, Tom pulled out his father's journal, flipping to the final entries. He held it close to protect the pages from the spray as he read aloud. "The door responds to touch, but not just any touch. It seems to recognize intention, perhaps even blood. Those who come seeking pass through. Those who come taking are denied." He looked up. "That's all he wrote about how to open it. What does that mean?" "Those who come seeking," Jacob asked. "I think," Eli said slowly, "it means it matters why we're here. What we want from this place." They fell silent, considering their own motivations. Each had come seeking something different. Eli following his father's path. Tom searching for answers about his own father's disappearance. Jacob running from his past. "Let's try together," Tom suggested finally. They positioned themselves before the door, arms outstretched, palms flat against the warm stone. The carved symbols seemed to pulse beneath their touch, the blue glow from the waterfall intensifying around them. "We should say something," Jacob said unexpectedly. "Tell it why we're here." It felt right somehow, this suggestion. One by one they spoke their truths to the door. "I'm looking for my father," Eli said simply. "I need to know what happened to my father," Tom added. Jacob hesitated. Then, "I'm looking for somewhere I can stop running." For a long moment nothing happened. The waterfall continued to roar. The stone remained solid beneath their hands. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a vibration began, not from the door but from the waterfall itself. The curtain of water parted slightly, as if drawn aside by invisible hands, revealing more of the doorway. The symbols beneath their palms began to glow with the same blue light as the falling water. The heartbeat sound grew louder, faster, no longer coming through the stone, but seeming to emanate from all around them. "Should we—" Jacob began, but his words were cut short as the door, without warning or sound, simply vanished beneath their hands. Beyond lay darkness, and a passage leading into the heart of the cliff. They retreated to their camp as darkness fell, the vanished doorway haunting their thoughts. None felt ready to step through that threshold into unknown darkness. "Not yet. We should wait until morning," Eli said, though they all sensed timing had little meaning in this place. Jacob nodded, relief evident in his posture. First light. As night settled over the clearing, the waterfall's sound changed. The constant roar developed undertones, rhythmic pulses that rose and fell in regular intervals. "Like breathing, you hear that?" Tom whispered. They gathered at the edge of their camp, listening. The waterfall was inhaling and exhaling, the flow increasing and decreasing slightly with each cycle. The glow within the water brightened with each exhale, dimming with each intake. "It's alive," Jacob said, his voice barely audible. None disputed this observation. After everything they'd seen, a living waterfall seemed almost expected. The moon rose behind the falls, a deep red orb that cast crimson light through the blue glowing water, creating purple shadows that moved independently of their sources. The breathing grew more pronounced as the moon climbed higher. "My father wrote about this," Tom said, consulting the journal by the light of a glowing river stone. "When the Guardian awakens under the red moon, the way will open fully." "Guardian?" Jacob repeated uneasily. Eli stood, staring at the falls. "The waterfall itself, maybe, or whatever lives within it." Sleep came fitfully that night. The breathing of the falls seemed to influence their own respiratory patterns, their chests rising and falling in synchrony with the massive pulses of water. Dreams flowed between them, images and sensations shared unconsciously, as if their minds were connected by the mist that rolled through their camp. They dreamed of a vast space beneath the mountain, of light without source, of figures moving in perfect geometric patterns. They dreamed of two worlds touching, overlapping, separated by the thinnest of barriers. Morning revealed another change. The river had shifted course again, now bending sharply toward the waterfall rather than away from it. The flow had increased dramatically overnight, water rushing toward the falls as if drawn by some powerful force. "It's like it's preparing for something," Tom observed as they ate a sparse breakfast. The symbols on Jacob's walking stick now glowed constantly, matching the pulsating rhythm of the falls. He set it down, uncomfortable with the connection. "Should we try the door again?" Eli asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Before anyone could respond, a new sound emerged from behind the waterfall, a low, melodic tone that cut through the roar of falling water. It held for several seconds, then shifted to a higher note, creating a two-tone harmony that resonated in their chests. Tom's compass began to spin wildly in his hand, then suddenly stopped, the needle pointing directly at the falls. At the same moment, the red moon, impossibly still visible in the morning sky, reached its zenith directly above the waterfall. The breathing rhythm accelerated. The glow intensified until it was almost painfully bright. The harmonic tones multiplied, becoming a chord, then a song without words. "It's time," Eli said simply. They gathered what little they would carry, a knife each, Tom's compass and journal, Jacob's walking stick, a pouch of glowing river stones. The rest they left, arranged neatly in camp, as if they intended to return, though none believed they would. At the base of the falls, the doorway was visible again, now fully revealed as the waterfall parted around it like a curtain drawn back by invisible hands. The carved symbols pulsed with light in perfect synchrony with the breathing water. "We didn't come this far to be afraid of what's waiting," Eli said, echoing words he'd spoken when they first spotted the falls. Tom nodded, glancing once more at his father's journal before tucking it securely inside his shirt. Jacob gripped his glowing walking stick, its power now feeling like protection rather than threat. They approached the doorway together. This time no touch was needed. The stone door simply vanished as they drew near, revealing a passage leading into darkness. From within came a warm breeze carrying scents none could identify. Sweet, ancient, alive, the harmonic tones grew louder, seeming to welcome them. The red moon cast their shadows long against the stone as they stood at the threshold. "Ready?" Eli asked. No one answered with words. Instead, Tom placed his hand on Eli's shoulder. Jacob nodded once, resolute. Together they stepped through the doorway and vanished from sight. Behind them, the waterfall resumed its normal flow, covering the entrance as if it had never parted. The breathing rhythm slowed, steadied, then disappeared back into the constant roar of falling water. The red moon set behind the cliffs, and the forest fell silent. 3 weeks after the young men had left Larkspur Crossing, the sheriff organized a search party. Not out of particular concern, men often left and never returned, but because Tom's mother hadn't stopped asking, and the drought had left little else to occupy the town. They probably found work somewhere north, the sheriff told the 5 men who volunteered. Or got themselves in trouble. Either way, we just need to bring back word. The boy's brother David insisted on joining. At 16, he was the image of Tom 5 years earlier. Same thoughtful eyes, same tendency to stare at the horizon. "You stay close," the sheriff instructed him. "First sign of trouble, you turn back." They followed the river north, just as the 3 young men had. The first few days were uneventful. Familiar terrain, clear tracks along the riverbank. But as they progressed, the landscape began to change in ways none of them had anticipated. "These rocks," one of the volunteers muttered, studying the strange formations that created whispering sounds when the wind blew. "Never seen anything like them," the sheriff frowned. "Let's keep moving." David lingered, pressing his ear to one of the stones. "It sounds like it's saying something," he said, but the sheriff pulled him away. The valley of fog slowed their progress considerably. They roped themselves together to avoid separation, moving carefully through the white void where distance and direction seemed to lose meaning. "This ain't natural," the sheriff kept saying, like a mantra to ward off his growing unease. David found himself tasting memories in the fog, his brother teaching him to fish, their mother's voice singing them to sleep. The others reported similar experiences, each man momentarily lost in his own past. When they emerged from the valley, they found the river had changed, wider, clearer, flowing with unusual speed. Several of the men wanted to turn back, but David spotted something glowing in the water. "Look," he said, pulling a luminescent stone from the riverbed. It pulsed with blue light in his palm. Some kind of mineral, the sheriff decided, though uncertainty edged his voice. Probably valuable. They pressed on, following the increasingly strange river. The forest of concentrically arranged trees unnerved them all, perfect circles within circles that no natural process could explain. "People did this," one of the volunteers insisted. Had to be people, but they found no signs of habitation until they reached the ancient stone foundations near the Waterfall clearing. By then, even the sheriff's confidence had faltered. "We'll make camp here," he said, "and search the area tomorrow." David woke before dawn, drawn by a sound he couldn't identify. He walked to the edge of the trees and saw it, the clearing, the cliff face, but no waterfall. Just a sheer rock wall where water should have fallen. "Sheriff," he called. "Something's wrong." The search party gathered at the edge of the clearing as light grew. Signs of recent habitation were everywhere. A fire pit with ashes still preserving some heat. 3 bedrolls arranged around it, equipment laid out neatly. "This is their camp," David said, recognizing his brother's pack. "But where are they?" The belongings were undisturbed, rifles leaning against a log, fishing line wound carefully on a stick, a pot with the remains of some meal. A careful inventory showed only a few items missing, a knife each, Tom's compass and journal. Nothing else. "It's like they stepped away for a moment and expected to come right back," one of the men observed. Most disturbing was the complete absence of tracks leading away from the camp. They searched in widening circles but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no indication of which direction the 3 might have gone. "What about the waterfall?" David asked, remembering Tom's fascination with their father's stories about following the river to its source. "What waterfall?" The sheriff replied. David pointed to the cliff face. "It should be there. That's what they were looking for." The sheriff studied the solid rock wall, then the river that now bent sharply away from the cliff as if avoiding it. "There's no waterfall here, son." "Never has been." But that evening, as the red moon rose, David heard it. Faint laughter carried on the breeze. 3 distinct voices he would recognize anywhere. One was unmistakably his brother's. The sheriff heard it too, though he tried to dismiss it as wind in the rocks. But when it came again, clearer this time, none of them could deny it. "They're still here," David whispered. Somehow. They spent 3 days searching, finding nothing but the perfectly preserved camp. The 3 young men from Larkspur had vanished completely, leaving everything behind except what they could carry in their pockets. On the 4th day, the sheriff made his decision. "We're heading back." "Taking their things to their families," David protested, but the determination in the sheriff's eyes silenced him. This place had shaken the older man badly. The whispering rocks, the memory-filled fog, the concentrically arranged trees, and most of all, the laughter that came with the red moon. They packed up the abandoned belongings carefully. David took his brother's journal, hoping for some clue, but found the last pages blank, as if Tom had stopped writing just before reaching the most important part of his story. As they departed, David looked back one last time. For an instant, he thought he saw a shimmer of falling water against the cliff face, a blue glow pulsing behind it. Then it was gone, leaving only solid rock and unanswered questions. The search party returned to Larkspur Crossing with rifles, packs, and bedrolls, but no young men, and no explanation that anyone was willing to believe. Light. That was Eli's first impression as they emerged from the passage. Not darkness as they'd expected, but light so pure and diffuse it seemed to have no source. It filled a vast space before them, illuminating what appeared to be an endless forest of crystalline structures. "Are those trees?" Jacob whispered, his voice hushed with awe. They weren't trees, not exactly. They resembled them in basic form. trunk-like bases rising to branch-like extensions, but they were translucent, faceted, catching and refracting the omnipresent light into rainbow patterns that included those impossible colors they'd seen outside. "They're beautiful," Tom said, reaching out to touch the nearest one. As his fingers made contact with the crystal surface, something extraordinary happened. The structure began to glow brighter, and within its depths an image formed. Tom as a child fishing with his father. The scene played silently within the crystal, perfectly preserved in every detail. Tom jerked his hand back as if burned. "Did you see that?" They had. Eli approached another crystal formation cautiously, extending his hand. When he touched it, a different memory appeared. Eli's mother singing him to sleep. Her face younger than he ever remembered seeing it. "It's showing us our memories," he said. Voice trembling slightly, Jacob hung back, reluctant to touch any of the crystals. "Not just ours," he said, pointing to one nearby. Within its depths, they could see faint images of people none of them recognized. Men and women in unfamiliar clothing, some carrying tools. Others simply walking between the crystal trees. "Others have been here before," Tom said. They moved deeper into the crystal forest, discovering paths worn into the ground beneath their feet. The air was still, silent, except for the faint musical tone their footsteps produced when they touched the ground. It wasn't cold or warm. It simply was, as if temperature had no meaning here. The crystal trees grew denser as they progressed, and the images within them more numerous and varied. Some showed scenes they recognized, Larkspur Crossing in earlier days, the river before the drought. Others displayed places none of them had ever seen, strange cities, unusual landscapes, skies with multiple moons. "It's like they're recording everything," Eli said, fascinated despite his unease. Tom noticed something else. His compass was functioning normally now, the needle pointing steadily forward. "This way," he said, following its direction. The path led them toward what appeared to be structures in the distance, buildings made of the same crystalline material as the trees, glowing within a light. As they drew closer, they could see these were indeed buildings, houses, halls, what might have been a marketplace, all arranged in a perfect circular pattern around a central plaza. "A town," Jacob said, "or what's left of one." The settlement was abandoned, at least at first glance. They moved through empty doorways into rooms where furniture made of crystal still stood, perfectly preserved. In what appeared to be a communal dining hall, tables were set with dishes that gleamed as if recently polished. "Where is everyone?" Jacob asked, the emptiness more unnerving than any threat. "Gone," Eli replied. Though he couldn't have explained how he knew, they reached the central plaza, where a large pool of the same crystalline material lay still as glass. When they approached, the surface rippled, though there was no wind. Images began to form in its depths, people moving through the very spaces they now stood in, living their lives in this strange crystal city. "It's showing us the past," Tom said, kneeling beside the pool. The scenes shifted rapidly, the city full of life, then gradually emptying. People departing in groups until only a few remained, then none. The final image showed the last inhabitants walking toward what appeared to be another doorway, similar to the one they had passed through, but larger, grander. "They left," Jacob said. "But where did they go?" They explored further, finding artifacts that spanned what seemed like centuries, tools from different eras, clothing styles that evolved over time, written records in languages that shifted and changed. In one small dwelling at the edge of the settlement, Tom made a discovery that stopped his heart. "That's my father's jacket," he whispered, approaching a crystal shelf where the familiar garment lay neatly folded. Beside it sat a journal, not the one Tom carried, but another identical except for its weathered state. When Tom opened it with trembling hands, he recognized his father's handwriting, continuing beyond the final entry in the copy he possessed. "He was here," Tom said, his voice breaking. "He made it through." Eli and Jacob gathered around as Tom carefully turned the pages, reading entries that described this crystal world in precise detail. The final pages contained something else, a map showing their current location and a path leading to what was labeled simply as the heart. "What is it?" Jacob asked. Tom looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. "I think it's where we need to go next." They spent the night in the abandoned crystal settlement, if night had any meaning in this place of unchanging light. Time seemed fluid here, moments stretching and compressing unpredictably. They slept because their bodies demanded it, not because darkness fell. Morning, as they defined it, brought renewed purpose. With Tom's father's expanded journal and map to guide them, they set out deeper into the crystal forest, following increasingly well-defined paths between the translucent structures. "The paths are worn smooth," Eli observed, studying the ground beneath their feet. "Many people have walked this way before." "Not recently," Jacob added, noticing how undisturbed the crystal dust lay on the surface. As they traveled, they encountered small, circular pools scattered throughout the forest. Unlike the central pool in the settlement, these were smaller, no larger than washing basins, and each contained a liquid that appeared motionless until disturbed. Tom approached one cautiously, leaning over to examine its mirror-like surface. When his breath rippled the liquid, an image formed. People in clothing from at least a century ago, working fields that no longer existed outside Larkspur Crossing. "It's showing the past," he said. Watching the silent scene play out, Eli tried another pool nearby. His touch created different ripples, revealing a family celebrating around a table laden with food, people he didn't recognize in a place he'd never been. "Not just our past," he corrected. "Everyone's. Different times, different places." They tested more pools as they encountered them. Some showed scenes they recognized from history books, the founding of cities, the building of railways. Others displayed moments so foreign they couldn't place them in any context they understood. Strange technologies, unfamiliar landscapes, people dressed in ways they'd never seen. "It's like this place connects too. Everywhere," Jacob said, his earlier wariness giving way to fascination. "Maybe even everywhere." The path led them onward, eventually bringing them to a clearing where the crystal trees grew taller and more complex. At the center stood structures that could only be dwellings, homes built from the same crystalline material but with distinct architectural styles that spoke of different origins and eras. "People lived here," Tom said as they explored the empty buildings. "Not just passed through, they settled." Inside the structures, they found belongings from vastly different time periods, clothing, tools, books in languages both familiar and alien. In one dwelling, primitive stone tools lay beside devices of unimaginable complexity. In another, handwritten scrolls shared space with bound books and thin screens of unknown material. "Look at this," Jacob called, holding up a carved wooden figure from one home. "This is Mayan work. I saw similar pieces in a museum once." In another building, Eli discovered a newspaper dated 1887, perfectly preserved. A few doors down, Tom found what appeared to be a journal written in modern English, but describing events none of them had heard of. Most startling was their discovery in the center of this smaller settlement, a larger pool showing images of people who once lived there. As they watched, the liquid cycled through scenes of daily life, revealing residents from widely different origins, learning to coexist, building this community together. "They came from different worlds," Eli said, the realization dawning slowly. "Different times, and they stayed," Jacob added. "Created this place together." Tom was only half listening. His attention had been caught by a familiar face in the pool's cycling images. His father, younger than Tom remembered him, helping build one of the crystal structures alongside others. "Dad?" he whispered. Kneeling closer, the image shifted, showing his father in conversation with an older man, gesturing toward a path leading away from the settlement. Then another scene, his father writing in the journal Tom now carried, his expression troubled. "He lived here for a while," Tom said, looking up at the others. "These pools are showing us his story." But the final images gave them pause, his father leaving the settlement, following the path toward where the map indicated the heart. Unlike the others in previous scenes who traveled in groups, his father went alone, his posture suggesting urgency, perhaps fear. In the very last image, he looked back once at the settlement, his face etched with an emotion none of them could quite name. Regret, determination, warning. Then the pool went still, its surface once again a perfect mirror. Tom stood slowly, clutching both journals, his copy and the version they'd found in the settlement. He went to the heart, he said. And he was afraid of what he'd find there. Eli studied the map again. The path continues just beyond these dwellings. According to this, we're about halfway there. Should we reconsider? Jacob asked quietly, the pool's final image of Tom's father lingering in all their minds. They stood in silence, surrounded by the remnants of lives from countless different origins, all drawn to this place between worlds, all eventually moving on toward the same destination. We've come too far, Tom finally said, echoing Eli's words from what felt like a lifetime ago. I need to know what happened to him. They gathered what supplies they could find and continued on the path, leaving the settlement of displaced travelers behind, moving toward whatever waited at the center of this crystal realm. Tom couldn't stop reading his father's journal as they walked. The entries continued far beyond where his copy had ended, chronicling months, perhaps years, spent in this crystal world. He calls it the between, Tom read aloud. Not quite one world or another, but a place where they touch. The journal described the settlement they'd just left, explaining that it had once been thriving, a community of travelers from countless different origins who had found their way through thin places like the Waterfall. Listen to this, Tom said, stopping on the path. The people here come from different times, different worlds. Some arrived by accident, others sought this place deliberately. All found doorways, waterfalls, caves, ancient gates, places where the barriers between realities grow thin. Eli and Jacob listened intently as Tom continued reading selected passages. They formed a community here, learning from each other, sharing knowledge from their diverse origins. For many years, this settlement flourished as a meeting point between worlds. But gradually, things began to change. The journal's tone grew darker in later entries, describing how residents began to leave, drawn toward the center of the crystal forest, where something called the heart pulsed with increasing power. They say the balance is shifting, Tom read, his voice dropping to match the ominous tone of the words. The heart grows stronger, pulling at the fabric between worlds. Some believe it's natural, a cycle that has happened before and will happen again. Others fear it means the end of the between, that soon the worlds will either merge completely or separate forever. The entries became more erratic after that, the handwriting changing subtly, becoming more hurried. Tom's father described strange phenomena, crystal trees shattering without cause, pools showing increasingly chaotic visions. The constant light of the between occasionally flickering. Most have left now, Tom read from one of the final pages. Some returned to their original worlds, if they could find the way. Others went to the heart, believing it offers salvation. Those who remain are preparing to leave soon. I've stayed to record what I can, but I fear I've waited too long. The paths back may already be closed to me. The very last entry was dated by some calendar none of them recognized, just days before the final page. I've decided to go to the heart. There's nowhere else left. The settlement is empty now, and the crystal trees near the outer boundaries have begun to collapse. Whatever is happening, the answers lie at the center. I leave this journal for those who might follow, especially my son, if he ever finds his way here. Tom, if you're reading this, be cautious. The heart calls to everyone differently. What I seek there may not be what I find. Tom closed the journal carefully, his hands trembling slightly. He knew you might follow him, Jacob said quietly. Or hoped I would, Tom replied. To find him or to learn what happened to him. Eli had been studying the map while Tom read. According to this, we should reach the heart within a day's journey, following this main path. They continued walking, each lost in thought. The crystal forest grew denser around them, the trees larger and more intricate, their internal images more vibrant and numerous. The path beneath their feet glowed faintly now, pulsing with light that seemed to respond to their footsteps. Jacob, who had been quiet for some time, finally spoke. "These paths, they're not just worn into the ground. They're made of something else." He knelt, examining the glowing surface more closely. "It's like they're alive somehow." He was right. The paths weren't merely trails beaten down by countless travelers. They were structures in their own right, composed of a material that resembled the crystal trees but was more fluid, more responsive. When they focused on where they wanted to go, the paths brightened before them, as if encouraging their progress. "The journal mentioned this," Tom said, flipping pages to find the reference. "The between guides those who have clear intentions. The paths respond to purpose, brightening for those who know what they seek." As if in response to his words, the path beneath them pulsed brighter, illuminating a clear route through the increasingly complex crystal forest. They walked for what felt like hours, though time remained impossible to measure reliably. Occasionally, they passed more of the small pools, but these showed increasingly fragmented images, broken glimpses of places and times, chaotic and disturbing. "The journal was right," Eli observed after they passed a particularly turbulent pool. "Something's happening to this place. It's becoming unstable." As they rounded a bend in the path, they encountered their first significant obstacle, a vast chasm cutting across their route, so deep its bottom was lost in darkness. The path continued on the far side, still glowing, still beckoning. "Now what?" Jacob asked, peering cautiously over the edge. Tom consulted the journal again. "The paths remain connected for those with true conviction," he read. "The between tests resolve, requiring faith to bridge its gaps." Eli looked from the journal to the chasm, understanding dawning in his eyes. "We have to believe the path will hold us," he said. "We have to trust it completely." They stood at the edge, staring at the seemingly unbridgeable gap, each wondering if their conviction was strong enough to carry them across. Eli stepped forward first, standing at the very edge of the chasm. The luminous path ended abruptly at his feet, resuming tantalizingly on the far side. The gap between seemed impossibly wide, at least 15 feet of empty space with no visible bottom. "I'll try first," he said quietly. Jacob grabbed his arm. "You can't be serious. It's just empty air." "Not empty," Tom corrected, studying the space between. "Look carefully. In the void, barely perceptible, faint patterns of light shifted and swirled, like dust motes in a sunbeam, but moving with purpose, responding to their attention." Eli gently removed Jacob's hand from his arm. "The journal says it requires conviction. I believe we're meant to find what's at the heart. I believe there's a way forward." He took a deep breath, focused his thoughts on that belief, and stepped out over the void for a heart-stopping moment. His foot met nothing, then, like ice crystallizing on water, light particles coalesced beneath his boot, forming a solid surface. As he transferred his weight, the path continued to materialize before him, one step at a time. "It works," he called back, voice tight with concentration. "But you have to truly believe. Any doubt, I can feel it trying to unravel beneath me." Tom followed next, clutching his father's journal to his chest like a talisman. The path solidified under his feet more readily, responding to his focused determination to find his father. Jacob watched from the edge, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. "I can't," he called to them. "I don't know what I believe anymore." Eli, now halfway across, turned carefully. "What did you tell the door, Jacob?" "Why are you here?" Jacob swallowed hard. "I said I was looking for somewhere I could stop running." "Then focus on that," Eli urged. "That's your purpose. That's your conviction." Jacob closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with newfound resolution. When he stepped forward, the path materialized, hesitantly at first, then more confidently as his determination strengthened. They crossed together, the bridge of light disappearing behind them as soon as they reached the other side. The path ahead brightened in response to their successful crossing, leading them deeper into increasingly extraordinary surroundings. The crystal trees here grew enormous, towering structures that branched and rebranched into infinite complexity. Within their translucent depths, images flowed continuously, no longer isolated memories, but interconnected streams of experience, whole lifetimes, civilizations, worlds in miniature. It's like they're collecting more the closer we get to the center, Tom observed. The path forked occasionally, but always one branch would glow more intensely than the others when they focused on their destination. The between seemed to guide them, responding to their intentions rather than any physical markers. As they walked, ghostly figures occasionally appeared in their peripheral vision, transparent, human-like forms that watched them briefly before fading away. Unlike the solid images captured in the crystal trees, these apparitions seemed aware, observing the travelers with intelligent curiosity. "They're like echoes," Tom suggested, consulting the journal. "My father wrote about them, remnants of those who stayed too long, neither fully here nor gone. Are they dangerous?" Jacob asked as a particularly clear apparition regarded them from beside the path. "I don't think so," Eli replied. "They seem more interested than threatening." The path led them through a section where crystal formations had shattered, their fragments strewn across the ground. The damage created eerie dissonance in the otherwise harmonious environment, like broken notes in a cosmic symphony. "The instability my father mentioned," Tom said, examining a fractured crystal tree. "It's getting worse." They hurried onward, the path brightening urgently beneath their feet, as if encouraging their haste. The light surrounding them began to pulse subtly, the rhythm matching the heartbeat-like sound they'd heard through the waterfall door. Ahead, through gaps in the crystal forest, they caught glimpses of something massive, a structure larger than any they'd seen thus far, pulsing with intense light. The heart, unmistakably. The path widened as they approached, joining other luminous routes coming from different directions, all converging toward the central structure. Unlike the settlements they'd passed, this area showed signs of recent activity. Footprints in the crystal dust, newly formed paths, even what appeared to be temporary shelters. "Others are gathering," Eli observed. Jacob, who had been examining the converging paths, pointed to one particularly bright route. "This one's been heavily used, and recently." Tom knelt to study the footprints more closely. After a moment, his breath caught. "These are my father's boots," he said, pointing to a distinctive pattern. They recognized the repair he made to the heel. He stood, gazing toward the massive structure now clearly visible ahead. "He came this way not long ago." The heart pulsed on the horizon, its light intensifying as if aware of their approach. The paths beneath them brightened in response, creating a luminous network guiding them forward. With renewed purpose, they continued, following the trail of Tom's father toward the center of the between, where answers awaited. For better or worse, the heart dominated everything as they approached. Not a building as they'd first thought, but a structure beyond easy categorization, a massive crystalline formation that pulsed with its own internal rhythm. Larger than any cathedral they'd ever seen or imagined, its surface shifted constantly, facets realigning themselves in patterns that seemed both random and deeply intentional. The blue glow they'd first observed in the river stones, then the waterfall, was present here in its purest form, a radiance that emanated from deep within the structure. "It's beautiful," Tom whispered as they drew closer. Jacob nodded wordlessly, his usual wariness temporarily forgotten in the face of such wonder. They weren't alone in their approach. Other figures moved along converging paths, some clearly human, others less so. All were drawn to the heart, though they maintained their distance from one another, each group or individual following their own route. The luminous path led them to what appeared to be an entrance, an archway formed where two massive crystal faces met, creating a gap just large enough to pass through. But before they could enter, something about the surface caught their attention. "Look," Eli said, stepping closer to the heart's exterior. The crystalline face before him didn't reflect his physical appearance as a mirror would. Instead, it showed something else, Eli as a child watching his father leave. Eli working his uncle's ranch with resentment burning inside him. Eli standing at the river's edge, making the decision to leave Larkspur. It's showing me, he said, transfixed. But not how I look, who I am. Tom approached cautiously, placing his hand on a different facet. In its depths appeared not his physical form, but images that defined him. His relationship with his father, his longing to understand the man's disappearance, his hope and fear about what he might find here, even Jacob, after initial hesitation, found himself drawn to touch the heart's surface. What he saw made him flinch, fire consuming a home, people screaming, himself running away. But then other images, kindnesses he'd shown, moments of courage, his decision to accompany Eli and Tom on this journey. It knows us, Jacob said, withdrawing his hand slowly. Sees into us, a soft voice spoke from behind them. It sees the truth of everyone who approaches. They turned to find an elderly man watching them. His clothes were worn but well kept, his face deeply lined, yet somehow ageless. Most striking were his eyes, pale blue, almost luminous, like they'd absorbed something of the heart's glow. You've come a long way, the man said, studying each of them in turn. Tom stepped forward, heart racing. We're looking for someone. My father. I know who you seek, the man interrupted gently. As the heart knows why you've come. He gestured for them to follow and led them around the perimeter of the massive structure. As they walked, he explained what the heart was, or at least what was understood of it. It exists at the center of what we call the between, a nexus where countless worlds touch. It's been here, always, as far as anyone knows. Growing, changing, pulsing, with the rhythm of all those connected realities. What does it do? Eli asked. The man considered this. It maintains balance, primarily. Keeps the worlds separate yet connected. Allows limited passage between them through places like your waterfall. They rounded a curve in the heart's perimeter and came upon a gathering of people, perhaps 30 individuals of varying appearances, some clearly from times and places far removed from Larkspur Crossing. They had constructed a small camp of sorts, with temporary shelters arranged in a semicircle, facing one particular facet of the heart. The keepers, the old man explained. Those who've chosen to stay, to help maintain the balance. Maintain it how? Jacob asked. By being here. By choosing to exist between worlds, rather than in any one of them. He gestured to himself. I've been a keeper for a very long time. Tom, who had been scanning the gathered people intently, suddenly froze. Among them, sitting slightly apart, was a man in his 50s with a familiar profile. Father, he whispered. The older man turned at the sound, his weathered face registering first disbelief, then recognition. He stood slowly, as if not trusting his eyes. Tom. How did you? His voice caught. You shouldn't be here. Tom rushed forward, embracing his father fiercely. The others held back, giving them space for this reunion. When they finally separated, Tom's father looked past him to Eli and Jacob, then back to his son with growing concern. You don't understand what's happening, he said urgently. The balance is failing. That's why I stayed, why all of us stayed. The heart needs keepers, or everything collapses. What do you mean, everything? Eli asked. The old man who had guided them answered. He means all worlds, all realities connected through the between. Without sufficient keepers to maintain the balance, the barriers thin too much. Worlds begin to bleed into one another. And that's bad, Jacob asked. Catastrophic, Tom's father replied grimly. Imagine realities with different physical laws, suddenly occupying the same space. Imagine the chaos, the destruction. He turned to his son, placing his hands on Tom's shoulders. And now you're here, which means you must choose too. All of you must. Tom's father led them into the heart through a narrow passage. Inside was a vast chamber, unlike anything they could have imagined. A space that seemed simultaneously enclosed and infinite, bounded yet boundless. At the center floated what appeared to be a complex three-dimensional web of light, countless strands of different colors and intensities, all connected in an intricate pattern that shifted subtly as they watched. The balance, Tom's father explained, gesturing toward the floating network. Or at least, how the heart lets us perceive it. Each strand of light, he explained, represented a connection between worlds. The brighter strands were stronger connections, places where the barriers were naturally thin, like their waterfall. The web as a whole maintained equilibrium between countless realities, keeping them separate yet connected. For most of time, the balance maintained itself, the old keeper added. Passages opened and closed naturally. Worlds touched briefly, then separated again. Tom studied the complex web, noticing that certain areas appeared dimmer, some strands frayed or broken entirely. "Something's changed," he said. His father nodded grimly. "The balance began weakening about a century ago, by your world's time. No one knows exactly why. Some believe it's a natural cycle. Others think something damaged it. How does staying here help?" Jacob asked, eyeing the web skeptically. Instead of answering directly, Tom's father approached the floating network and extended his hand. A strand of light detached itself from the web and wrapped around his wrist, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "We become part of it," he said. "Our presence, our consciousness, it helps stabilize the connections. The more keepers there are, the stronger the balance." Eli moved closer to the web, fascinated. "How many keepers does it need?" "More than we have now," the old man answered. "Once there were hundreds. Now barely 30 remain." Tom's father released the strand, which rejoined the web. "That's why I stayed. I found this place by accident, following the river just like you did. When I understood what was at stake, I couldn't leave. But you left us," Tom said quietly. "You left Mom and me." Pain flashed across his father's face. "The hardest choice I've ever made. But if the balance fails completely, all worlds suffer, including ours. Including Larkspur." The old keeper gestured toward a particularly unstable section of the web. "This is happening already. When connections fail, realities begin to bleed into each other. Strange phenomena occur. Impossible weather, objects that shouldn't exist, physics that doesn't make sense." The drought, Eli realized suddenly. The dying town, the river changing course, it's all connected to this? "Yes," Tom's father confirmed. "Your world is one of many affected. The strange things you encountered on your journey, the whispering rocks, the fog that tasted of memories, the trees growing in perfect circles, all symptoms of worlds bleeding together where they shouldn't." He turned to face them directly. "Now you understand why I stayed, and why we need more keepers." The implication hung heavy in the air. "You're asking us to stay too," Jacob said. "Not a question, but a statement." "At least one of you must," the old keeper replied. "The balance requires it." Tom stepped back, overwhelmed. "For how long?" His father's expression was answer enough. "Forever," Eli said softly. "That's what you mean, isn't it? Whoever stays can never go back." The old keeper nodded. "Those who become part of the balance are changed by it. Not immediately, but over time. Eventually, returning to your original world becomes impossible." They moved away from the web to a quieter corner of the chamber where they could speak privately. Tom's father explained how the process worked, how keepers gradually transformed, becoming attuned to the heart's rhythms, their consciousness expanding to encompass multiple realities simultaneously. "It's not a prison," he insisted. "It's a different kind of existence. Not better or worse, just more." "And if none of us stays?" Jacob asked. The old keeper answered from where he stood near the entrance. "Then the balance continues to weaken. Eventually, catastrophic bleed-through occurs. Worlds collide in ways they were never meant to." "How long?" Eli pressed. "Months, perhaps." "A year at most." They fell silent, each contemplating this impossible choice. To stay meant giving up everything and everyone they knew. To leave meant potentially dooming those same people. Tom looked at his father, older now, changed by his years here, but still recognizable. "Are you happy here?" he asked simply. His father considered the question carefully. "I found purpose here," he answered finally, "and a kind of peace in knowing why I made my choice. But I've missed you every day." Outside the heart, night was falling, or what passed for night in the between. The glow of the crystal forest dimmed slightly, creating the illusion of evening. The keepers had gathered for a meal, sharing food from various worlds and times. You don't have to decide immediately. the old keeper told them. Rest, think, the heart will wait for your answer. But as they joined the gathering, each man knew that time, even in this place where it flowed strangely, was running out. For the balance, for their world, and for the choice that would determine the rest of their lives. Dawn in the between brought no sun, only a gradual brightening of the omnipresent light. The three men had spent the night in separate corners of the keeper's camp, each wrestling with the impossible choice before them as they gathered for a simple breakfast. Their decision hung between them, unspoken but pressing with every passing moment. "I'll stay," Eli said suddenly, setting down his cup. "It should be me." Tom looked up sharply. "Eli, you don't have to." "I do," Eli interrupted. "I've been searching for something my whole life without knowing what it was. Maybe this is it." He gestured to the heart pulsing nearby. "A purpose larger than myself." Jacob studied his friend's face, seeing the resolve there. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be about something like this." Tom's father joined them, sensing the weight of the moment. "One is enough," he said quietly. "The rest can return." They spent the morning saying goodbye. The old keeper explained how they would return. A different passage, not through the waterfall, but a more direct route the keepers had maintained specifically for those leaving the between. "The way back shifts constantly," he explained. "The waterfall you came through may not exist anymore, or may lead somewhere else entirely." Tom embraced his father one last time. "I'll tell Mom you're alive, that you found something important. Tell her I'm sorry," his father replied, voice thick with emotion. "And that I think of her every day." Eli stood with the old keeper near the heart's entrance, preparing for the ceremony that would formally connect him to the balance. The process was simple yet profound. He would approach the web of light, extend his hand, and accept the connection it offered. From that moment, he would begin the gradual transformation into a keeper. "You're making the right choice," the old man assured him. "For all worlds?" Jacob approached Eli, awkward in his farewell. They had travelled together for weeks, shared dangers and wonders none in Larkspur would ever believe. How did one say goodbye knowing it was forever? "I never told you why I was really running," Jacob said finally. "There was a fire in the last town I lived in. People died. They think I started it." Eli's expression remained steady. "Did you?" "No, but I couldn't prove it and I had to leave." Jacob swallowed hard. "You're the first people who trusted me without question since then." "I won't forget that." They clasped hands, then embraced briefly. Tom's goodbye was equally difficult. "We'll tell your story," he promised. "Not everything, they wouldn't believe it all, but enough that they'll know you did something brave." Eli nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. The ceremony was brief. Eli approached the web of light within the heart, extended his hand, and a strand detached itself, wrapping gently around his wrist. For a moment, his eyes widened in wonder as he felt the first touch of countless connected worlds flowing through him. "I see them," he whispered. "So many." Then it was done. The strand remained connected to him, pulsing gently in rhythm with his heartbeat. The balance visibly strengthened, the web growing brighter where it had been dim. Tom's father embraced his son one final time. "The passage will take you directly back to where the waterfall should be. From there, follow the river home. Will we remember everything?" Jacob asked. The old keeper smiled gently. "That depends on you. Some find the memories too difficult to reconcile with the world they return to. Others keep them close, though few speak of what they've seen." They departed through a small doorway on the far side of the heart, a simple arch that glowed with soft light. Tom looked back once to see his father and Eli standing side by side, already beginning the work of maintaining the balance together. Then they stepped through, and the between vanished. They emerged at the base of a cliff, the same cliff where the waterfall had been. But now no water fell from its heights. The river had changed course, bending away from the rock face, as if intentionally avoiding it. "It's hiding the way," Jacob said softly. "Protecting the secret. Their camp remained exactly as they'd left it, bedrolls arranged around the cold fire pit, supplies stacked neatly, rifles leaning against a fallen log. It seemed impossible that anyone could simply vanish from this world, leaving everything behind. Yet that's precisely what had happened to Eli. They gathered what they would take back to Larkspur, proof they'd been here, though not of what they'd found. Some stories were better left untold, or told only in part. As they prepared to depart, Tom glanced back at the cliff face one last time. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a shimmer in the air, like water falling where no water should be. Then it was gone. Ready? Jacob asked, shouldering his pack. Tom nodded, turning away from the cliff to face the long journey home. The river flowed before them, its course altered, but its direction still true. South now, always south, back to Larkspur Crossing and the world they'd almost left behind.